That one cage line. Is it about Pike or about 1964? Today on Trekland Tuesdays Live. With me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming at you right here, as always, every Tuesday from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47. For the big picture, some clarity and sanity in most things Star Trek. Welcome back, everybody, for another Tuesday session here with all of our TTLers. If you're new to the show, hey, welcome. It's great. I'm coming to you from a really busy Tuesday. Not only did we have overlapping Star Treks last week, to right now, it seems to be tour season. Now, as we speak, there are some of the high donors to the Voyager documentary, and there's like 40 or 50 of them coming in for some special tours that the Voyager documentary people set up that are one-off actor meet you at a location place, and some dinners at night with some of the actors. So it's perk week for the Voyager documentary here live in LA, and I'm going to lead a couple of those this week and see people at a couple of dinners. It seems like the tours are exploding all over, which is why I'm really thrilled to remind you that if you're going to Trek Vegas, there is a day tour with Geek Nation Tours where we go out to the Valley of Fire, an hour northeast of Las Vegas, to where Kirk died in Generations. I call it the Kirk Memorial Tour. But there's some goofy, funky Star Trek things out there besides the film site that we also take in. It's a lot of fun. Maybe you've seen photos. And also, I'm really thrilled and excited. This is 2/3 of the way to already making. I only needed 6 minimum. I've got 4 people. The Gene Roddenberry Great Birds Origins Tour. It's a life tour of life places around LA. So go to my website, larrynemecek.com. Find out all about that. I'm about to upgrade the page a little bit. And then next spring, we're going to have tours around the cruise departure. I'm working on that right now. And then, of course, next July, a year from July, is the return of the big multi-day West Coast away mission. It's LA and San Francisco next year, with Geek Nation Tours, myself leading it. And this is just the beginning of some of the familiar faces we're going to have with us. It's going to be a little bit more celeb studded. I mean, I think the experience and my wonderful insight is enough. But no, there's some places where it's such a great add-on to have. And in this case, it's actually actors who have something to do with the place we're going to. They're not just there to be supportive. So, gosh, tours. I've already done 2 Trekland Treks, just individual private tours this year so far. Last week ago Friday, or last Friday on the lot. Again, amazing. Hottest day of the year, of course. And that's just in the tour nook of the words. We've got books coming. We've got everything Star Trek is booming, including, of course, what's like on the screen. And last week, the chitters, the Twitters, the Facebookers, everything was full up of a lot of commentary. I think people generally were happy with Strange New Worlds. I think they're still, generally happy with Picard, although they're still lukewarm about it. I'm generally happy with everything. When I have a red flag go off, my brain immediately goes into smooth it out, fix it mode, because what else are you going to do? Think maybe in 20 years when they come out with the 5J Pink Ray edition, somebody will go in and fix it if it's a visual. If it's canon and conceptual, though, it's a little hard to do that. So, I feel like right now with all I'm seeing online, it's the greatest time ever for not just one, but everything on my hashtag list, which aren't necessarily converted or connected. But it's like everything of my hashtag sayings is in play. Led off with, of course, texture, not trivia, which is what I want to talk about today. Use the universe means it's not fan service unless it's just really fan service porn. If it's obviously. Otherwise, use the universe, right? Canon in a vacuum is about the canon we use when it's not on screen, and it's good enough to go by a pecking order, maybe by creatives, by established authors, creators. And then maybe when it comes time for it to be on screen, someone will go use that, or maybe, hey, they'll come up with something brand new, and your former canon in a vacuum is now been superseded by something that's on screen. Looking at you, as confusing as it was, Hobus Subspace Shockwave Supernova. God. Prime is not hard. The Prime universe is not hard to keep up with. And also, canon is not scary. It's for all the folks whose just eyes cross and think canon is a weight around your neck, when it can be the best thing ever for coming up with more texture, not trivia. And that's what I think we've been seeing on Strange New Worlds and even Picard. We did this last week. We did this with I know, the April recon casting. Hey, nobody was even talking about Chief Kyle. Chief Kyle. Which Chief Kyle? It's 9 years before we see the Kyle of the original series. 9 years? 7 years. Lots can happen in 7 years. Lots of folks have different names. But there was one moment in my Twitter feed that kept popping up that was really interesting. And it was like a 55-year throwback at times, much less what was just going on last week. And that's what I'm talking about here. You know what I mean? That one line in The Cage. Is it about Pike or is it about 1964? And it seems to have gotten a whole new re-airing this year in some quarters, at least in the quarters that frequent Larry Nemecek on Twitter. It goes back to the moment on the bridge where Jeffrey Hunter's Pike is kind of huff-hawing about his new yeoman, who is not a yeoman, is a yo-woman. And she's a little awkward because she's young. And he says, I don't know if I'll ever get used to a woman on the bridge. And it's almost a setup for number one, Magel's number one, to whip around and give him a dirty look or a confused look or a hurt look. And then Pike very quickly says, oh, what does he say? No offense, number one, something to that effect. And then we move on. And it's amazing how when sleeping dogs lie and then they rise up again. No, it's people are going back to point to that line. Does that show that Pike is sexist and a throwback? Because now we are fleshing out the time. Are we fleshing out the time with Strange New Worlds, or are we retconning it? I don't think we have to do this. I know a lot of people are somewhere they're a little down. They're apologetic. They are sympathetic. Oh, well, we can't change 1964, but we can sure produce a new show today. Well, I agree with all that. I'm just saying, I don't know that there's a need to. Now, look, years ago, people have even pointing this out. They talk about framing Star Trek with that line and then going to the old Janice Lester chestnut about your world of starship captains doesn't include me or women. Well, 20, 30 years ago, I headcanoned, if that's what we say now. I made peace with myself that she is obviously a sociopathic, not well person. And the only way she can explain her failures, both romantically and career-wise, is to blame misogyny. You know, and even people would point to Captain Hernandez in Archer's time and say, well, this is obviously not true. And you could come back and say, well, that was our Starfleet. It wasn't the Combined Federation Force. To be true, there were no, and I've even looked at extras in the background. I don't believe there were any captains, much less flag rank women in the original series, sadly. But we can jump right into the motion picture very quickly. There are women and captains in the background, and even though it's in the novelization, Kirk's 2-year marriage partner that Nagura maneuvered to maneuver him to where he was as chief of ops. If you also read Gene's novelization, you have a perfect excuse to why we're abandoning the original visual look of the original series, because it was the dramatized, maybe adventures meant to portray Kirk's adventures to the mass public. That's a whole other story. We've talked about it. I'm just saying. Obviously, we have since massively retconned, and the fact that we see the captain of the Saratoga, the old Saratoga in Star Trek IV, maybe for the first time as an actual woman on the bridge, the fact that it was Madge Sinclair, who in another life is Geordi's mom, that's kind of retconning it. Although, you know, Star Trek IV in the trilogy is another 14, 15 years later. So you could say, oh, no, there was a massive reform, a feminist reform to allow women to be captains and above in between the original series and Star Trek IV in that 15-year gap. The other big reform being, of course, getting rid of pastel uniforms. Which look gorgeous, by the way. Give them another chance. Give everything another chance in the art palette of motion picture when you see the 4K Director's Edition now. You never get that blasé gray blue feeling if you're watching it on a half-decent system, home or in a theater. But I'm digressing. People look at the Janice Lester line, and I just go back to the fact she was deluded, a sociopath, psychopath, and she's justifying her personal failures by spreading it to be a massive social issue. Other than that, we have no outright, we don't have any visual proof otherwise, but we have nobody criticizing or commenting on, oh, well, that'll be the day when a woman's a captain. Nothing like that ever happened. So let's just hold tight to that. In fact, the only thing that rears up a little bit of misogyny, aside from, yes, I know, a lot of the subtextual just writing of some of the shows, some of the moments, some of the Kirk moments, I know the 60s-ness pours through there, but at least as far as over this Cage line of Pikes is the closest that comes to it. But I would say to you, number one, haha, no pun intended, Pike is really depressed right now, as we know. In fact, it takes a while. It took me until a couple of years ago to realize, until we saw Anson's joyous Pike coming aboard Discovery, which did feel basically right. It didn't feel out of step at all with Jeff Hunter's, because remember, what we see of Pike in the Cage, until the very last Flintstones ending scene on the bridge, he's depressed. He is stressed out. In fact, right off the bat, we perhaps meet, aside from Ben Sisko, we perhaps, and the first glimpse of Sisko, we see him as a competent first officer on his Saratoga before the ship is blown to pieces along with his wife, and his bitterness sets in. But apart from 5 minutes in Sisko, we never see a captain this low when we first meet them in a pilot, right? I believe. So number one, there's that phrase again. First off, we're seeing Pike at an absolute low, but even more than that, there's obviously a relationship, not a romantic relationship, but there's a relationship between he and number one. And he's not above, I think, poking her. I think he's just doing a little dig. Now, is he yucking about it? No, because he's kind of stressed and depressed and at the point of thinking of resigning and doing all kinds of crazy things that Boyce kind of slaps him back into reality over, like any good CMO would do to his captain. So I see people talking about this. They either Pike is sexist, which obviously is not true. The writers were sexist. Now, this is the point. I've seen people say also that somebody mentioned, well, the Cage was never aired, so it isn't canon, so let's not even worry about it. But I hate to tell you that, no, it was never aired, except that it was as a special in 1988, 87, 88, when it was put on VHS tape for the first time, when they found in the entire intact color version, after the entire intact color splice with black and white version had been released as well, which I still have that tape. It's amazing. I don't ever want us to lose historical track of that. It had been available, much less the fact that ever since we've had cable, at least the last 4, 5, 6 years, the Cage is right there, not even at the end of the series the way it was on the VHS release. It was the weird episode 80. No, it's right there as season 1, episode 0. So it's right there in front of the first episode. It's right there, the first thing you watch. If somebody sits down to watch original series, front row, bang, there it is. So yeah, it's very much canon, which, brings up the headaches. We've got the 1964 retcon. I'm just saying that this line, there's even people that say that line, I believe, check me on this, the line was one of the scenes that was not in the menagerie. So it shouldn't be, which we've already poo-pooed that. Now, the bottom line here is they want to forgive Pike and just say, well, it was 64 and the writers were sexist. Well, let's look at that a minute. It's 1964, but the writers was Gene Roddenberry, period. It's the friggin' pilot. It's Gene. Now, I know. You're going to go off on the Mad Men angle of Gene in his 60s. The button on the desk to let him know which woman was waiting on the outside to come in to catch him with what woman on the inside. But I will also submit to you that he's got number one there as second in command in the first place. He's the one fighting to have the ship be 50-50 male-female. And I'm going with the most general of pronouns here, okay? So don't shoot me. He was looking for a 50-50 crew. He had to fight for and settle for a 66-33, a 2/3 third crew. Don't you see? If we've got 50-50 crews, people will think there's a lot of hanky-panky going on up there. That's his quote, his sub-quotation of the network execs in the Inside Star Trek line album. And he's got the initiator of the whole incident himself. He's got a woman man, which was mind-bending enough. His main 2 women characters otherwise would have been traditional males. So sexist? I don't think so. What I want to broach here is the line, I can't get used to women on the bridge, was both a poke at number one and recovering about being flustered by the yeoman and trying to make her feel a little better, but just trying to make light of the whole situation. He's giving her a poke, but Pike is giving number one a poke. But Gene in his script is putting it in the face of the audience. Oh, by the way, if you hadn't noticed, we've got two women on the bridge, and one of them is the second in command. Hello, what we'll eventually establish as 2254. Hello, 1964, 1965 audience, or at least 1965 network execs to start. So yeah, it's Gene making sure you realize that there's women. Now, he does it kind of bass-ackwards, but again, he's done it, I think, in a wry Captain Pike way, maybe not so wry. Maybe Captain Pike is a little more wry here because he's in such a terrible emotional state. But it's, we think of this line, and it's taken Strange New Worlds and everybody's love affair with Anson and his Pike now to go back and have this line kind of explodes out of the archives at us, the way things do at times. And we go back, we find bits and pieces, especially any of our newer fans, our younger fans, and they are a little jarring. And I'm just going to say, we have safely, Pike's house guest that we wake up with is fully a captain. And I love the fact they address each other as captain. That's wonderful. So we know they're our captain. And you could say, well, now it's been retconned. Okay. But if it's all going to be the Prime Universe hanging together, it is what it is. And I'm just saying that nothing in that scene negates that or Pike's attitude. In fact, as someone else pointed out, before Spock joins the crew again, there's a moment when Pike is on a bridge and he's the only male. It's a fully staffed bridge and he's the only guy, which is so subversively mind-blowing too. So look, we talked about this with this whole recasting of Commodore April as a black man, technically an African Canadian. And it's animated, and people, we got off on a status about the animated, not so much about the retcon, because if they're going to hold true to the original casting, it was 1964. It was default white. It was basically default male, except for the two things that Gene was trying to insert and fight for. So, well, if you're going to have white male and technically a white female, and then a white actor playing a Vulcan. I know. It's great that they've diversified the casting and sprinkled as many species as they can. Not excluding the fact that we're going to have an Andorian, technically an Anar, as chief engineer, which is awesome. I'm just going to have to rely on Prodigy having a chief medical officer Tellarite to get by for a while longer. But that said, the only question here is why recreate some of these characters? I'm coming around to the quiet eruption over Chief Kyle, young Asian actor playing instead of British the way John Winston did. That's, to me, a little more interesting than the whole thing about Admiral April. I'm just saying, by the time it's done, I want to know what happened to Admiral April to get busted down to Commodore. And I want to see at some point or hear mention of his wife, Sarah, who I hope is a medical doctor and at least a former Starfleet starship doctor, and a pioneering one in some way that we can bend around. I'm going to wait and see what happens with Chief Kyle. I'll be a little sad if it's completely retcon just for John Winston. John Winston is not animated Admiral April or Commodore April, voiced by James Doohan. John Winston had several appearances, including the Wrath of Khan on the Reliant, but still. So it's a little different. It's 7 years apart. We'll hear what's going on. Maybe there are different Kyles who both happen to be transporter operators. We'll see. I am not going to sink an entire series on one of these. And maybe it's never addressed, and we just go our merry way in 10 or 20 years and say there were two Chief Kyles under two different captains. Maybe we will. And we can have the best of all worlds. It's not enough to sink the show. I think most people were delighted. Now, there's one other bit here. And we've already talked about the whole thing in sickbay. What's going on with Chapel and what's going on with M'Benga? Where is M'Benga and Boyce? Where's M'Benga and Piper and McCoy? And coming back to McCoy, or was he there the whole time? Not being a CMO when he is CMO. It's a delightful actor, delightful character, delightful actor who played meanies on his other roles, not unlike D. And I can't wait to see what they do with that. It's off to a great start. Chapel, of course. We've got Chapel from, how does she get from Spock to Corby and back. And my goodness, I haven't even mentioned T'Pring looking already unfulfilled and unhappy. You see the seeds. I think it's a brilliant way to do it. Pike knows T'Pring. Nobody has to know that Kirk and McCoy know who T'Pring is. Maybe by that time, Spock is not talking about his personal life. Oh, golly, what a concept. We're talking about 6-7 years later. So nothing is out of whack. I thought it was wonderful backstory for T'Pring, and it totally sets up what happens in Amok Time by then. Getting her from Spock to Stan and well, sorry. So I'm fine. The one little hiccup that's interesting is La'an, and I almost refuse to keep saying Noonien Sung just because it's a mouthful. La'an is a great looking character. Actress is lovely. Has a great sense of humor if you've seen her in any of her interviews. But the fact that her family trauma in her younger years was caused by a Gorn kidnapping and a Gorn attack and a Gorn assault, and that throws people because we're talking about first contacts in canon. And me too. I was like, I think some people were confused thinking that the people on the planet were the Kylians that they were involved with and broke first contact protocol to just get them up to speed. No, the Gordon was part of Lon's, totally on a pad, maybe a mention or two by her, but basically it's on the pad that was made very readable. By the way, shout out to Tim Peel and the insane CGI graphics department for all those beautiful star charts that are so clearly and elegantly and consistently deployed across all the series now. It's amazing. Yeah, the Gorn thing, of everything, may have left me a little the most but I think we have Borg first contact thanks to Q in Q Who, but we now know that the Hansons were investigating myths and legends about Borg and encountered them 10 years before that. So, and I'm not even thinking not even talking about Archer's infamous, who are these people? I guess we can't log them accurately, Ferengi and Borg encounter. So there's asterisks. There's grain that goes against there's texture that goes against the grain on all of these things. They're not all cut and dried. It's 7 years before. People can read that report and know who the Gorn are. They don't know. She's seen them, maybe. Her family has. When we figure out, the proof will be in the pudding of how her backstory is explored at some point. We'll get a flashback. We may have a repercussions incident, or it may never be touched on again. I'm just saying that we've got a history of first contacts not being quite so pristine and pure. Even we find out more about them later. Obviously, that happened. Years go by. We're reading a pad with years to go by before Arena. But for now, I can let it ride and enjoy the hell out of the series. I don't know how you are about it. I think most people are there. I'm very grateful that they reined in the bridge sets and didn't have it be quite the bus station it was with the outer loop corridor and all of that. It's been lightened up a lot and gotten out of the glossy black look of Discovery. And you know what? We should not let Picard go unmentioned either. There was a lot of blow up, a lot of discussion, honest, earnest discussion. I should say that I haven't seen hate anywhere, but then again, I don't go looking for it. I don't go see the toxic tubers. So I'm sure that's probably going on some level. But even talking about what does this mean for the Borg Collective now with Queen Jurati? What does it mean for her? There's pretty much a consensus, and until we get this out of Akiva, I think Terry, I have to check with Terry, but he may have backed off on that part of it. But to speak for the show, but we're looking basically like it's a small mini collective. And before you get your pants in a wad about that one, remember we've had the mini collective of freed Borg out of the cube, the restoration project. We've had the freed Borg that Voyager found that kickstarted the whole Borg comeback story going into First Contact. We've got the Unimatrix Zero Borg underground. So, I mean, it's not the first time we've seen splinters off the collective. What's the shape of the greater collective? Did Janeway bash it down, shut it down? No, I mean, they're still functioning. And then we get into all kinds of time loops about, well, if Jurati has been here for 400 years, then did anything involving her ever occur? What happened with the events of season 1? You get into that. I mean, if you want to get into butterflies, Rios stayed behind in 2024. They play out his life. That was kind of amazing. Not that it's never happened before. Everything from Jillian coming forward 100 years, and what were the butterflies of that, to God, McCoy's gift glasses winding up at a pawn shop in 1986 San Francisco. I mean, there have been butterfly moments, despite the best efforts of our stalwart Starfleet people to never break temporal orders, especially in the years when they didn't exist. This is why one faction of fans will say, this is why canon keeping is ridiculous, because it gets broken all the time. This is why the rest of us will say, yes, exceptions happen. But if we don't make an attempt to keep the basic guardrails in place, then we're just all over the map. And it's not so much out of commission as omission. People that just don't know, just like the first 2 or 3 years of Next Gen writers, pre-Memory Alpha, pre-encyclopedia, pre-anything, because we were at square zero then, not looking back. But in the day, having material on the original series, but nothing on what they had already written, as the writing team, the Chaos on the Bridge writing staff, was turning over and over and over. And that's why my Next Generation annual concordances, annual encyclopedias, were a godsend to them, because they suddenly had an easier access. Now, everybody, they don't just have Memory Alpha. They got Tim Peel with the Master Stellar Database made up from stellar cartography that they're adding to consistently. It's amazing. I hope we can get into this story and start sharing that with the world. I'm so excited for it. You're seeing the results and the fruits of the labor popping up. And I know I've gone far afield from my original line, but let's wrap this up. I think there's plenty of room to do all this, because on the Picard side, the very bottom of it all, and maybe I should have just made this a separate topic some week. What was the instigator? What was the cause of the entire plot arc of season 2 Picard? It was Q. Basically, I saw somebody say, so season 2 Picard was basically a 10-hour version of Tapestry, which, yeah, slightly different flavor. Which begs to my question, if we went and delved into the mental health of Picard and this deep, dark secret he had cauterized over in his heart, in his emotional health, about his mother's suicide, to the point where he just imagines her older, and his first go-to image of her is older, as in Where No One's Gone Before. If that's all true, and that made him the man he is now in some layers, especially his intimate life, how did we get from the boy who imagined his mother never having died, and especially having been the instrument of her death by leaving the key and letting her into the basement, and yada yada? How do we get from there to the crazy ass guy that gets stabbed by the Nausicaans at Earhart Station at the Domjot table? The whole lesson of Tapestry was that crazy boy Picard, had he tried to avoid the conflict, would have wound up as a wallflower in Starfleet. And it's getting the artificial heart and turning something on that made him the leader, gave him the gravitas and the cojones to go on and be the captain he was. Exactly the opposite of Kirk, who was a stack of books with legs, remember? And then loosened up a little bit. I always loved how Picard and Kirk's trajectories were different that way. Now I'm looking at wondering how that kid dealt with that trauma to be the wild man on campus, which in some ways I can totally see. But it's just interesting. This is not the first time we've delved into the psyche of JL. And here's where I wish I had Dr. Ali. Here's where I miss Life Support Live. Maybe we'll do that as one of our specials now, because we started with the traumas of Jean-Luc Picard, and now we've got a whole new one to layer on, and now we got to start collecting the dots to make sure his traumas don't bump into each other and they flow smoothly into the man he is that we know. So the bottom line, is that it's all because of Q. And name me one time in the entire history of the Star Trek franchise since Q's premiere when anything Q did was chalked up to science and technobabble. It's the closest thing we have to magic in Star Trek. They are mortal. They can commit suicide. They can fight each other in the Q Civil War. They do reproduce by some belabored method, or not belabored, and they do eventually die. Spoilers. How do they do what they do? As much as our science-driven tech world of Star Trek, in the grand tradition of the entire rest of the franchise since TNG, anything that you have a problem about, Jurati and Elnor on his ship, and Rios and Jurati being gone in the blink of an eye from the Stargazer Bridge, and Butterfly. Just put your faith in Q. Put your faith that in his last gasp of energy expended, He fixed everything. Everything that needs to be fixed is fixed. So no headaches from the time travel of Girardi and her time loop and her, two places at one time. No issues with anything. Clean slate. Yay, it's TV. No, it's Q. But just going forward and settling into this Strange New Worlds Planet of the Week situation with these running arcs going, which isn't so much the original series as it's more like Next Generation back at that level. But can't wait to see where it goes. Can't wait to talk to the creatives behind it. Maybe get a little more firming up of what some of these concepts are for going forward, because there is a Picard season 3 that is wrapped. It's totally done. We know who's not coming back. We know who is. We'll see, gang. I'm pretty excited. I'm excited to see so much chatter. All this discussion, the discussion, again, that I saw was civil and spirited and forceful, but nothing that was off the edge, nothing horrible, nothing ugly. Maybe it's a little bit of sarcasm, but a little healthy sarcasm is totally good for us. Ask Chris Pike on the bridge when he's feeling at his most depressed. Sarcasm FTW sometimes. Let's move along. I want to thank everybody for being with us. And the ones I want to thank first, of course, are our Patreon folks. So thank you, everybody who's in on our Patreon, our TTLers, right? That's Diana Hopkins and Robin Wilson and Lawrence Todd and Marie Siegel, Keith Rombach, Justin Porteous, Nathaniel Robinson, and Blaze K. Thank you, thank you. And our live wires, of course, Rusty Harold, Halbert Gunn Johnson, Robert McLean, Alan Hoensi, J.R. Poole, Byron Bailey, Dave Gregory, Gay Clevin Lindstrom, and Casey Shafsky. Thanks so much for everybody. If you want to jump in on my Patreon, it's pretty simple. It's just a $5 and $10 level. I know. I've got to finish serving the $10, but it's patreon.com/Trekland Live. The grand reopening is upon us, and things are a little crazy. I hope everybody's staying safe and well and doing all the things and looking forward to being quasi-normal again. I hope I'm not speaking too soon. And as we go about it, looking around here as we wind things down, I do want to remind everybody there's another Trek Files up. I'm back with the great Fran Taylor of Sci-Fi Sisters, looking at a memo Gene wrote about cautioning against casting that's not very diversified because of default human casting. It's an interesting corollary to the casting revolutions of the 70s, 80s, 90s, getting a little more diversity on TV, and the 20s, I should say, I guess. So check it out. It's right there at the Trek Files on Facebook where the document is, but podcast.roddenberry.com for all of this and the new ones. There's a fun Sci-Fi 5 out today about a wacky Australian sci-fi show from the 70s. It's trying to look like Star Trek without being Star Trek. You should go check it out. But there's a whole host of Roddenberry podcasts now that are a lot of fun. Otherwise, hey, gang, I'm at Larry Nemecek on Twitter. Please like and subscribe me over on YouTube at Larry Nemecek's Trekland if you're not there already. It's also the same for Instagram and Facebook, where a lot of you are. Really appreciate that. Oh, yeah, portal47.net. We've had new members coming in all spring. It's lovely to see that as everybody feels like the need to connect our old dots with our new dots and stay up with the old and the new. And we've got two exciting guests coming in Portal. Kirk Thatcher, yeah, punk on a bus, but also a producer and an ILM associate from 3 and 4 of the original movies. And then Dave Blass, who I've gotten to know here just in the last few months, who's responsible for so much of the cool, funky, grounded feeling of Picard. Even if you didn't always like where the story went, it was such a fun ride to visually experience. And some of the old guard that he pulled in to add touches, at all over the place, either big, bold ones or even slight things like Jeff Mandel behind the flags at Starfleet Academy. If you're watching us later, you're missing all the live action. And I know it's on a Tuesday afternoon for most of the states. So if you do get a chance sometime and you're watching later all the time, try us out Tuesdays at 1 Pacific and 4 Eastern. Till then, if you're leaving us now, stay healthy, do all the things. Stay woke, check your sources, And then if it looks like it's a real person, maybe open your mind to what they're saying, because there's a lot that they have kept from us over the years. And I'm not saying that with my tin foil hat on. I'm saying that as somebody who didn't know about the Tulsa Race Massacre until I was in my 30s, and I grew up 2 hours from Tulsa. That's my go-to anger point. I guess what I'm saying, everybody, is have a fun spring and trek well.